Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. On this video, we will see further concepts of multiple API versioning using the inbuilt API versioning, in the .NET Core Web API project. So let's flip to Visual Studio and let us work with the same project which we have created in our last session, and I will show quickly what we have. So we have version controller, and it is handling the version of 1, and we do have version 2 controller, and that is handling the version 2. And let's try to quickly run the application and test once. So run the application and Swagger is loaded. Let's quickly invoke the endpoint. So for the better understanding, I'm just copying the URL and let us try to test with the Postman. So let's paste the URL, and yeah, so in the URL we have given v1, so we get the response this is a response from v1.0. so let us quickly check in the code as well whether it is coming from the version 1 endpoint. So yeah, this is the version 1 endpoint, and here we could see the description is this is a response from v1.0, so it is coming from here. So quickly we will test for the version 2 as well, and let's see what the response we get. So for the version 2, when we try to invoke, we get the response as response from v2, and let us verify that in the code as well. So in the code we could see version 2 and this is the response. So it works fine. And now what if we want to merge or have the version 1 and version 2 code in the same controller? So let's say we want to have this version 2 endpoint as well in the version 1. So how can we do that? So let's try to make that change. So let us comment this controller itself completely. So let me comment that. So version 2 we have commented, and let us try to copy the endpoint alone, and let's try to paste over here. So let's say this is index 2, something like that, response from v2 from the same controller. So just change the description a little bit, and here what we love to say is so now API version 1 and API version 2 is handling in the same controller, so we will have to specify the API version 2 as well here. So let us include that as well. So API version attribute 2.0. And here in the endpoint we will have to specify the request that should point to which version actually. So for that we'll have to include a attribute called map API version. So for us this needs to point to version 1.0. So let's decorate this to 1.0, and the second endpoint that needs to point to the version 2.0, right? So let's make it to 2.0, and with this change let's try to run the application and let us test what happens. All right, application is running, and go back to the Postman, and now let's verify with the version 2, and for the version 2 we see response from v2 from the same controller that we have made. And on the other hand, let us try to test for the version 1 as well, and let's see what happens. Yeah, so version 1 also it works, and the correct response is coming. And let us try to test with some version which is not at all there, or we haven't configured anything for this version in our application. So version 3, and for version 3 we don't have any config, so clearly it says unsupported API version, so it is working perfectly fine. Now let's see, let's say we have to pass the version in the header. Okay, so how can we achieve that? So in order to achieve that, so let's flip to our code and stop our application. Okay, and let's go back to our program.cs file and navigate to the configuration of API version. So here is the configuration. So if we have to pass the API version in the header, we have to include API reader, API version reader attribute here, and let's say it has to be new header API version reader. Okay, and here we'll have to specify the header name. So let me give header name as x-api version. Okay, and that's it. So in the controller level, let's navigate to our controller, and now we don't want to pass the version in the URL, instead we want to pass it in the header, right? So let us change the route according to that. So let's comment this route and let's not pass the version in the URL. So our route should be something like this: API slash and the controller name itself. So with this change, let's try to run the application and let's see what happens. So application is running, and now let us try to invoke our application. So let's invoke with this one. So it says 404 not found. That is because we don't specify, or we don't have any route with the version itself, right? So now without any version, let's try to invoke it and let's see what happens. It is calling the version 1. That is because when we don't specify any version, our config will use the default API version, right? So what we have defined the default API version here, if you see, default API version is 1.0. So that is why when we don't specify anything, it is pointing to the version 1, and it gets the response successfully. On the other hand, let us try to provide the header. So x API version, and let's try to specify version as 2, right? And this time it has to point to the version 2, and let's see if it is fetching correctly. And can you see? So it is fetching correctly. Okay, so here if we specify 1, and it will point to the version 1, and here if we specify any version which we haven't configured, and we will get the unsupported API version error. That's fine. And what happens if we specify header something like this: x-api-version-vnd, right? And if we specify like this, and our application will not consider, and it will redirect to the version 1 by default, right? Can you see? It is pointing to version 1, and it cannot uh, read from this header. And if you need this header to be customized, what you can do is you can specify this header in our config. Okay, so let's try to do that as well. Let's stop our application. Let's go back to our program.cs file, and let's try to specify this header in the config. And now let's run the application with this change. So application is running. Let's flip to Postman, and now let's try to test with this change. So with version 3, it gives unsupported API version, which is correct, and with 2 it should point to the version 2. So it is pointing to version 2 perfectly. and with 1 it should point to uh, API version 1, so it is working perfectly fine. So that's what I wanted to cover in this video. So if you like this video, please like and please do subscribe our channel, and please do share these videos to your friends who wants to learn .NET Core and multiple API versioning. Thank you for watching. Have a good one.